The evolution of change that starts like a ripple and builds to an overflow, then sweeps the consciousness to bend the paths of time, is set by the steady, constant cadence of those known and unknown. And slowly but surely, change comes in spite of it all. By the turn of the 19th century, Mound Bayou, Mississippi was a bustling town located in the heart of the Mississippi Delta. Founded by Isaiah T. Montgomery in 1887, Mount Bayou became a showpiece for African American enterprise. At a time when African Americans faced the possibility of death for just trying to vote, residents of Mound Bayou were founding banks, opening restaurants, grocery stores, building homes, and serving in various capacities as duly elected officials. African Americans also owned large amounts of land and plantations in this fertile, delta-rich area around Mound Bayou, which they also leased to tenant farmers who raised cotton, rice, and their families. Wilbert Yank Simmons, the grandfather of Dr. Ollie B. Shirley, was one of those landowners. United States Senator Blanche Kelso Bruce was his neighbor.
We lived across the road from B.K. Bruce's plantation. If you know who that is, that's one of the first blacks who was elected to a Senate seat in Washington. But his plantation, and my grandparents knew him, but he was dead by the time we came along.
Dr. Shirley's early subjugation to the separate but equal Mississippi educational system had a great impact on her life.
It was interesting because my parents were the teachers at a one-room school, and Daddy would go with the bigger boys, and they'd walk to the school and build a fire in the heater so that it would be warm by the time the other children got there. So we didn't have, we had to bring our own lunches. We had paper sacks and buckets, jelly buckets and things with all of our food in it, because we had no way to heat anything. And we had outdoor toilets. All of our books were used books, pages torn out of them. There was no place for us to write our names because they were all filled with white names that they had passed on to us. But what was so insulting to me was the fact that white children lived in that area, and I guess they lived on farms. I never really knew where they came from. But they would catch the bus in front of our house, and they would ride to school. When they would get to our house, they would be hungry. And my mother always cooked, grits and biscuits and everything, a full breakfast every day. So the children would want the food. And my father would say, no, don't you give them anything. And my mother would go ahead and give it to them. She said, well, Walter, the children don't have anything to do with this. So they would eat our food, but he wouldn't let them in the house. They always had to stay outside on the porch. And they would even, when it snowed, they would take their shoes off and walk in the snow barefooted so they wouldn't ruin their shoes. And they put their shoes on our porch, and then they catch the bus. Well, the bus was driven by a white high school student. And this bus would go around to all the different plantations, because usually the overseers were generally white, even B.K. Bruce's plantation, because I, for a long time, didn't even realize he was black, because whites always ran that plantation. But anyway, they would stop at our house and pick up the children, the white children, off the porch. And then when we would start walking to school, they would splash mud on us, and they would try to run us. We would have to jump the ditch to get out the way of the bus because they were trying to splash us and throw things at us.
It was these early experiences that served as the catalyst which shaped a young girl into a passionate, formidable woman who clearly understood that separate is unequal and quality education is not a privilege, it is a right. After graduation from high school in Mound Bayou, Dr. Shirley set her sights on college.
Yeah, I actually was accepted at Tuskegee. And at the last minute, my mother and father said, I was 15. And they said, you're so young, said, we want you to stay close to home. So I hurriedly applied to Tougaloo. And I was accepted at Tougaloo, but I was just so disappointed that I didn't get to go to Tuskegee. So they told me that I could go my sophomore year to Tuskegee. Well, after I got to Tougaloo, I didn't want to leave. So I stayed, and I met Aaron, and we married and had children and all that. So that's how if I had not gone to Tougaloo, I would have missed that great opportunity to find my husband.
Because she worked for Dr. T.R.M. Howard, an ardent fighter for civil rights and economic empowerment for Mississippi African Americans, Dr. Shirley's summer internship in his office served as an early deterrent to her employment.
Let me see, can I finish this? We had planned to stay, and Aaron's family wanted us to come back. And Mr. I.S. Sanders at Lanier said he had a job for me. I would come back. And I came back. But I worked only 3 days, and I had turned in my application, and my application had Dr. Howard's name on it. And he had come down here and told the governor he was not interested in segregated schools or separate but equal schools. He said, I want the same damn thing for our children that you want for yours. Well, because I used him as a reference, they told me to go home and that I would never work in Jackson again.
But work again in Jackson she did. First as a teacher at Lanier High School, and later as president of the Jackson Public School Board for 15 years. Whether serving as editor of the Vicksburg Citizen's Appeal, a newspaper which began publication during the Civil Rights Movement in Vicksburg, Mississippi, or helping people to register to vote for the first time, Dr. Shirley, a commensurate activist, firmly believed that the forces of systemic racism could not be allowed to flourish.
During the summers, I would haul people to the polls, to the courthouse rather, to register. And the first, I think Crystal was in diapers, I believe, because I know I'd take my baby with me, put her in the car. And I'd pick up all these old ladies. People would call, somebody was manning the phone banks, and they would call and tell me where to go. So I would go and pick up these different, usually they were old ladies. And when I get to the courthouse, I would help somebody out of the car and hand the baby, Crystal, to the ones outside. Then I get the others out of the car, and then we go on up the steps. But the first time we got there, they wouldn't let us register them. The first group I took, they said, you have to pass this test. And I told them, this man's name was Noel Nutt. I'll remember him, just like Kirby Walker. I'll always remember Noel Nutt. But Mr. Nutt said, you have to take this test. And I said, no, the Civil Rights Act has passed, and they don't have to take a test. Oh, yeah, you're going to have to take this test. They aren't going to register until they pass this test. So I went to the phone, and I called Mr. Summers, who was the head of the Warren County Improvement League. He came to the courthouse, and he called Bobby Kennedy. He was able to get him on the phone. And Bobby Kennedy said, let me speak to Mr. Nutt. And Mr. Nutt went to the phone, and Bobby Kennedy says, these people have to be allowed to register to vote. And they were allowed to register.
Dr. Shirley also served as the education chair for the Mississippi State Conference of the NAACP. Through her involvement with the Children's Television Network, Dr. Shirley continued to break down those barriers which enslaved the minds of our children. Positive race images were not the norm in Mississippi, even in the 70s.
I think in 1970, I believe it's when it went on nationally, and Mississippi would not accept it because they said it was communist-inspired and all this, because black and white children were on there together. So finally, in December, I believe, well, I know I was hired in December, and there was a vote to allow Sesame Street to be shown on Mississippi ETV. So They started, I think, like January, February of 71, I believe.
Forging the way to dispel myths as state and later regional coordinator for PBS, Dr. Shirley helped the messages of Sesame Street and the Electric Company to spread throughout Mississippi and 12 other states. She clearly understood that where there is ignorance, a mind cannot flourish. Some people define the civil rights movement as a time during the 1950s and 60s when a group of people, black and white, united to eliminate segregation and to gain equal rights. But Ollie Brown Shirley believes that as long as the Confederate flag flies over the schools which black children attend, or teachers continue to receive inequitable pay, and standardized tests are used as a rating system as opposed to a measurement, then there is nothing civil or right, and her attention must remain focused on paving the way for our children's children to learn and grow, in spite of it all.